Is this a flaw in the way the Fed works? Like, it seems like always in these cycles, basically what you said happens, which is things go really bad, they cut a lot. Like, is there any way they could, I mean, I guess that's the nature of the backward looking data and how long it takes to come through and stuff, but is there any way they could operate in such a way that we ever would have like the slowly work the rates down and ease right in there type of cycle? Or is this just kind of the nature of the way the game is?
Well, for any of these central banks, their slow-moving nature and backward-looking demeanor, I call it a feature and a bug. It's a feature because what it means is if you understand the data that they look at and the way that they make their decision and how they balance things, it's a feature because you can have a much better understanding of where they're likely to go if you can start to think about what's going to happen with the economy than they know. So that's a feature. The bug is that it means that policy is always delayed. And this is how it works with all these central banks. Two main reasons. One, they are consensus-driven organizations. That's a very important thing to think about, which means that the action only comes when the last person decides that it makes sense to move, right? That's the nature of a consensus-driven organization. And two, they're looking at the actual data. They're not looking at, they're in general not predicting what's going on. They may make predictions, but they are not changing their policy based on predictions, right? They're changing their policy based upon the actual data that they see. If you go back and, go read what Powell said in November and December about what was going to happen to the economy, he was the one who was saying that there were going to be a bunch of cuts happening, but who cares? His predictions were irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was what actually transpired with the actual data and the actual economy, and that didn't align with cutting, so they didn't cut, right? And so that really emphasizes the fact that it's the data that they make the decision on a backward-looking basis, and it's consensus-driven, which means slow-moving. And so you add those two things up, and unless there's an acute crisis, they just don't move that fast in any direction.
Do you think, I was listening to you on the Unusual Whales last one they did with Jem Kersan, and he was talking about the idea that he thinks they might, not a lot, but they might cut, through the end of the year. And he also thinks that might bring like a meaningful acceleration in inflation, like not 4%, but something like much higher in the future. Like it would be a huge mistake to be cutting right now. Like, what do you think about that idea? Like if they do cut now, it could cause like a meaningful acceleration in inflation.
Well, just nothing really moves that fast. I think that's part of the lesson of the last couple of years is, the real economy just is like not that sensitive to interest rates. And so they're on a tightening side, but also on an easing side, right? Like they're not, if the Fed moves 25, 50 basis points in terms of a cutting cycle, like what are the odds that it's going to, who is doing what in response to that will meaningfully influence economic conditions? And I think the answer is like not, there aren't a lot of folks whose economic conditions are constrained by interest rate changes that are on the order of 25 or 50 basis points. And the reason why that is mostly what's happening, most of what's driving economic conditions right now is income and income growth. That's basically what we see is households are earning a pretty good income, 5 to 6% a year, and they're spending 5 to 6% a year nominal. And the savings rate's basically flat. Like that's basically what's happening. And businesses are earning, reasonable earnings. And to the extent that they need to do CapEx, they're financing it out of cash flow and mostly not borrowing. And so an incremental move of interest rates in one direction or another isn't going to make a huge difference in any time frame that the Fed cares about to cause their change in behavior. Now, if we entered a significant easing cycle, we're talking about hundreds of basis points of easing, then I think what we would experience is we'd unleash, incremental borrowing that would supplement the already elevated nominal income growth. And that incremental borrowing would mean that overall nominal spending would be elevated in comparison to the productive capacity of the economy. We're already at, the U.S. is already at the productive capacity, right? I mean, employment, you can't find any more people, right? I mean, part of the reason why it's been able to continue to expand is because we've had so much immigration. If you just look at, employment as a percent of the, prime working age population, it's basically at all-time highs. So like there is no incremental supply that can come into the market and meet higher nominal demand. So I agree, like a significant easing cycle might cause a reacceleration in nominal spending and lead to inflation. But, anything that's in the range of anything that's plausible from the Fed, frankly, won't do much whether they do something or don't do something.